What's up, my fellow Shield Brothers? It's the Shield Brother here for the History Armada. We're back again with another video for this July 4th, the American Independence Day. So, this video is going to be a brief overview of the cause, what it was, and the after effects of the American Independence Day and the Declaration of Independence. It's going to be a short video, more aimed at people who don't know what the Declaration of Independence and the July 4th celebration is, or those who just want a brief history about it. So with that, let's get started for today. On July 4th, 1776, the 13 colonies claimed their independence from England, an event which would eventually lead to the formation of the United States. Each year on the 4th of July, also known as Independence Day, Americans celebrate this historic event. So, let's talk about the causes of their need for, or desire for, independence. So, throughout the 1760s and early 1770s, the North American colonists found themselves increasingly at odds with British imperial policies regarding taxation and frontier policy. When repeated protests failed to influence British policies about the taxation without representation, and instead resulted in the closing of the port of Boston and the declaration of martial law within Massachusetts by the British government, the colonial government sent delegates to a Continental Congress to coordinate a colonial boycott of British goods. When fighting broke out between American colonists and British forces within Massachusetts, the Continental Congress worked with local groups originally intended to enforce the boycott to coordinate resistance against the British. British officials throughout the colonies increasingly found their authority challenged by informal local governments, although loyalist sentiment remained strong in some areas of the colonies. But despite these changes, colonial leaders hoped to reconcile with British government, and all but the most radical members of Congress were unwilling to declare independence. However, in late 1775, Benjamin Franklin, then a member of the Secret Committee of Correspondence, hinted to French agents and other European sympathizers that the colonies were increasingly leaning towards seeking independence. While perhaps true, Benjamin Franklin also hoped to convince the French to supply the colonists with aid. Independence would be necessary, however, before French officials would even consider the possibility of an alliance. These causes all working together to form what would be the Congress and the Declaration later on, after their grievances went unheeded and even tread upon by their British overlords. So, most colonists continued to quietly accept British rule until Parliament's enactment of the Tea Act in 1773, which the Tea Act was a bill designed to save the faltering East India Company by greatly lowering its tea tax and granting it a monopoly on the American tea trade. The low tax allowed the East India Company to undercut even tea smuggled into America by Dutch traders, and many colonists viewed the act as another example of taxation tyranny, and thus the fires are stoked. In response, militant patriots within Massachusetts organized the Boston Tea Party, which saw British tea valued at some £18,000 dumped into the Boston harbor. The British Parliament, outraged by this so-called Boston Tea Party and other blatant acts of destruction of British property, enacted the Coercive Acts, also known as the Intolerable Acts, in 1774. The Coercive Acts closed Boston to merchant trading. It established formal British military rule in Massachusetts, and it made British officials immune to criminal prosecution within America, and required colonists to quarter British troops. The colonists subsequently called the First Continental Congress to consider a united American resistance to the British. Thus, the idea of independence was further strengthened by these so-called intolerable acts thrust upon the colonies by the British. So, throughout the winter of 1775 and 1776, the members of the Continental Congress came to view reconciliation with Britain as highly unlikely, and independence the only course of action available to them. When on December 22nd, 1775, the British Parliament prohibited trade with the colonies, Congress responded in April of 1776 by opening colonial ports. This was a major step towards severing ties with Britain, and the colonists were aided by the January publication of Thomas Paine's pamphlet, Common Sense, which advocated the colonies' independence and was widely distributed throughout the colonies. By February of 1776, colonial leaders were discussing the possibility of forming foreign alliances and began to draft the model treaty that would serve as a basis for the 1778 alliance with France. Therefore, the withering connections with Britain further withered, and there was a desire to sever these ties entirely. And leaders for the cause of independence wanted to make certain that they had sufficient congressional support before they would bring the issue on to a vote. On June 7th of 1776, Richard Henry Lee introduced a motion in Congress to declare independence. Other members of Congress were amenable, but throughout some colonies were not quite ready. But therefore, the decision came to a head. Conflict between the colonies and England was already a year old when the colonies convened a Continental Congress in Philadelphia in the summer of 1776. On June 7th, there was a session held in Pennsylvania State House, later renamed the Independence Hall, and Richard Henry Lee of Virginia presented a resolution with the famous words, "Resolved, that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved." Lee's words were the impetus for the drafting of a formal Declaration of Independence. Although the resolution was not followed up on immediately, on June 11th, consideration of the resolution and decision was postponed by a vote of 7 colonies to 5, with New York abstaining from voting. So, Committee of 5 was appointed to draft a statement presenting to the world the colony's case for independence. Members of the committee included John Adams of Massachusetts, Roger Sherman of Connecticut, Benjamin Franklin of Pennsylvania, Robert R. Livingston of New York, and Thomas Jefferson of Virginia. The task of drafting the actual Declaration of Independence fell on Jefferson. On July 1st, 1776, the Continental Congress reconvened, and the following day, the Lee Resolution for Independence was adopted. 12 of the 13 colonies voting yes, New York not voting once again. So the Continental Congress reconvened on July 1st, as I stated, and the following day, 12 of the 13 colonies adopted Lee's resolution for independence. The process of consideration and revising the declaration made by Jefferson continued on July 3rd and into the late morning of July 4th, during which Congress deleted and revived some 1/5 of its text. The delegates made no changes to the key preamble, however, and the basic document remained Jefferson's words. Congress officially adopted the Declaration of Independence later on the 4th of July. Although most historians now accept the document was not signed until August 2nd due to many different travel issues, etc. But anyway, the Declaration of Independence became a significant landmark in the history of democracy, and its birth date is often remembered as July 4th. In addition to its importance in the fate of the fledgling American nation, it also exerted a tremendous influence outside the United States, most memorably on the French during the French Revolution. Together with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence can be counted as one of the 3 essential founding documents of the United States government and the American rights. So that same month, the recent British immigrant Thomas Paine published Common Sense, in which he argued that independence was a natural right, and that it was the only possible course of action for the colonies. The pamphlet sold more than 150,000 copies in its first few weeks of publication within the colonies. Even after the initial battles in the Revolutionary War broke out, few colonists desired complete independence from Great Britain, and those who did, like John Adams, were considered radical. But the idea still spread throughout the entire 13 colonies, and the pamphlet was like a torch to a bonfire. As soon as those kindlings were lit, it spread throughout the colonies, and the ripples in the water spread throughout. So, the Declaration of Independence and the 4th of July is remembered as the birth date and, the declaration for the United States. But the Revolutionary War and the American Revolution would follow shortly after. The American Revolution would last for 5 more years after the signing of the Declaration of Independence. There were many battles and many struggles yet to be faced by these new Americans. Yet to come were the Patriot triumphs at Saratoga, the bitter winter at Valley Forge, the intervention of the French, and the final victory at Yorktown in 1781. It's not until 1783, with the signing of the Treaty of Paris with Britain, that the United States formally became a free and independent nation. There was many lasting effects of the free American nation and the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence gave birth to many other freedoms in the United States of America that may never have been intended. One of the more immediate effects felt by the Declaration of Independence was the emancipation of black slaves during the Civil War. Some say that Abraham Lincoln interpreted the Declaration of Independence in his own way and understanding. Some say he was even inspired to do so. Either way, it brought about the Emancipation Proclamation, which gave black slaves their freedom. Abraham Lincoln certainly took literally the statement from the Declaration that they are endowed by their Creator and certain unalienable rights, that amongst these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The American dream put in a nutshell. The Declaration of Independence is even considered as one of history's best pieces of writings by some scholars, and a turning point in human, and not only American, but human views by others, as the thoughts of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution would be the basis for what the French would fight for in a revolution, and even the Germans in 1845 would look for, and just the lasting effects that these ideas and ideals would have on history. So thank you so much for watching. This has been the Shield Brother for the History Armada, as we talked about the Declaration of Independence and the 4th of July and why it's celebrated in America. I hope you learned something. I hope you got a little bit of something after this. I hope you enjoy this American holiday, and I hope you go out and have a great 4th of July. And with that, thank you for watching, and as always, I'll catch y'all next time.